Well, I want to say first off, I've always appreciated that about you, which is why I've agreed to do this twice actually, because you have a great sensitivity for something called the brand, and it kind of sounds funny to talk about that when you're talking about just an individual, but when I was growing up, I used to hear people always talk about, his philosophy of life is, and I always thought, I must not be very smart or deep because I don't have a philosophy.
Right.
And then I realized as I went along, actually I do, I've just never named it, I've never declared it as that. I do have a philosophy, I've just never labeled it as such. And when I think about brand, I think about it's the philosophy of a company or an individual, and a lot of companies are personality driven. Dr. Phil is personality driven. And when I think about the brand, I'm somebody that believes in a defined product. I think you've got to pick a horse and ride it. And you can't ride two horses with one ass. So you got to pick something and commit, and you're going to ride that, and you're going to ride off a cliff, or you're going to ride across the finish line. But you got to pick something and commit to it and stay with it.
We were just sitting back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that. Tracking my roots, where I came from.
I'm Dr. Phil McGraw, and you're watching Behind the Brand with Brian Elliott.
Hey, I'm Brian Elliott. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Brand. Dr. Phil, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
Last time I asked you how you got this job, and you told me you had this sort of Midwest upbringing, born to humble circumstances, found your way to Texas, right?
We just started our 19th season. We've passed 3,000 shows, and we have other shows that we do, but Dr. Phil is what takes up most of my time, certainly my on-camera time. And we're having an absolute ball. And when I say ball, not every show is fun. We do a lot of shows that are very heavy and deal with things because, I was thinking back, I was talking to Oprah not long ago, right before the season started, because we were kind of saying, can you believe it's been 18 years finished and starting 19? I was thinking back to the first interview I did when we were getting ready to take the show out to the market. And Roger King asked me, okay, Doc, what's the show about? And I think the first thing I said was, we're going to talk about the silent epidemics in America. We're going to talk about the things that people don't talk about in polite society, and we're going to try to move the conversation about mental health and mental illness to the forefront of the narrative in American society. And I reflected on that as we started the 19th season, and I can honestly say that we've been pretty true to that mission. I think that's pretty much what we're doing. It's morphed in that we're doing a lot of news type things now. We don't break news. We go behind the big headlines, and as Paul Harvey used to say, we tell the rest of the story. Not the headline, but how it really impacts the people that are caught up in the crossfire of the headlines, the news that our ADD society grabs the headline and moves on. We talk about how it's impacted the people. COVID's a perfect example. When you see a hurricane or a natural disaster or some headline grabbing tragedy, when all the cameras clear and people have moved on to the next story, what's the aftermath? How does it affect people? Whether it's depression, PTSD, fractured families, whatever. We try to look at that, and every show begins with the question, what's the takeaway for the viewer? And we stayed pretty consistent with that over 19 years, so that's what we're doing. We do a lot of other things too. We do The Doctors, which is a medical information show. We do Daily Mail TV, which is kind of a headline-driven, across the board, everything from pop to politics. show. We have some scripted shows that we do, some documentary type shows that we do in prime time, those sort of things.
Do you think it's pretty widely known that you have a production company and you're producing scripted TV as well?
It depends on who the audience is that you say widely known. I think it's widely known within the industry.
Right.
But I think the average person on the street, Betty in Idaho, as I call her, just the average American, probably not a whole lot.
Yeah. And so your production company produces the show Bull, right?
We do.
And it's loosely or strongly based on your character, or?
It's based on my life before the Dr. Phil show, when I was in the trial science business, and Dr. Jason Bull is kind of inspired by Dr. Phil McGraw.
Yeah. So how involved are you in that writing? And are you like the script supervisor? You're sort of helping them say, oh, that's accurate, or that's.
Well, I'm involved in it a lot, actually. Our showrunner is Glenn Caron, and who's the best showrunner in the business, in my opinion. And he doesn't need a lot of help in anything, but on the trial science aspect of things, there's not a lot of people in the television industry that know anything about that. So I'm the go-to resource on that, and he and I speak quite frequently, and we work out scenarios, and the question is often, in the real world, how would you handle this case? What would you do? What would you ask the jury during voir dire? What kind of juror would you be looking for?
Yeah.
What would be the nuances in this case? Things like that. And so we try to make it very authentic. Mm-hmm. And so he and I talk a lot. We talk today, as a matter of fact. We had our first episode last night, which is a real departure from anything that we've done before. And we actually broke the fourth wall in a scripted series.
Oh, wow. So for the non-production people, what does that mean, breaking the fourth wall?
During the show, we actually broke character and showed production. We stayed true to the script, and then at the end, I don't want to give too much away of people that maybe have it recorded, but we pulled the camera back and showed production, and Dr. Bull was hallucinating from COVID. And then we showed all the characters in makeup and their trailers, and in the end they said, hey, we're really glad to be back, and we hope everybody's safe and happy and healthy. And
that's pretty cool.
It was really interesting.
Why did you decide that? I mean, it's a creative choice. Why did you decide to pull back that far?
Well, because I think, to me, I think it's important to meet the viewer where they are, instead of expect them to always meet you where you are. And I guess that comes from my being so involved with real life television. I try to have a real sensitivity to what the viewer is thinking sitting on the couch, and they see this fantasy television, but then I think it's great to say, hey, just like you, our lives have been disrupted, and we're real happy to be back. Mm-hmm. And everybody lined up and said that at the end. So we've missed you guys, we're real happy to be back, and here we go. And then we'll be coming back to normal next time. And it's been written about a lot by the critics all day long and gotten rave reviews. So
yeah, good on you. I think that's really smart to really sort of walk the talk, right? Like the authenticity factor. And
you got to know your audience, and I think meeting people where they are, they appreciate that you acknowledge, hey, I know this is tough. I know everybody's been kind of holed up, and we have too, and we're damn glad to be back here working. And so it's different.
So this show's called Behind the Brand. I'm sort of the brand guy. I like to talk about brands and stories. I want to ask you what you think your definition of brand is, and then tell me what you think the Dr. Phil brand is. So what is the definition of brand to you?
Well, I want to say, first off, I've always appreciated that about you, which is why I've agreed to do this twice, actually, because you have a great sensitivity for something called the brand, and it kind of sounds funny to talk about that when you're talking about just an individual. But, when I was growing up, I used to hear people always talk about, his philosophy of life is, and I always thought, I must not be very smart or deep because I don't have a philosophy. And then I realized as I went along, actually I do, I've just never named it, I've never declared it as that. I do have a philosophy, I've just never labeled it as such. And when I think about brand, I think about it's the philosophy of a company or an individual, and a lot of companies are personality driven. Dr. Phil is personality driven. When I think about the brand, I'm somebody that believes in a defined product. I think you've got to pick a horse and ride it. And you can't ride two horses with one ass. So you got to pick something and commit, and you're going to ride that, and you're going to ride off a cliff, or you're going to ride across the finish line. But you got to pick something and commit to it and stay with it. And so you have to pick it very carefully, and you got to be a good steward of what you pick, or it's not going to work for you. And so the Dr. Phil brand, to me, has always been, number one, very commonsensical. Because I know a lot of 75-cent words, I just try not to use them. You know, I can talk to you about your schizophrenic mother and all that, but you know, that may impress my colleagues, but the average viewer's like, you know, what are you talking about? Yeah. So I try to be very commonsensical and talk about things that matter to people who care. And that's a pretty busy sentence. Things that matter to people that care about those things. And to me, that's a brand in a capsule. If you talk about things in a commonsensical way, and you have your finger on the pulse so you understand what matters to people. And because it doesn't matter what matters to me, because I'm not the typical American, and I'm not my demographic. You know, my demographic in daytime television are women, you know, probably 25 to 54. And I'm not, which is why I've got 300 people on my staff and 90+% of them are women.
So I know we're about to start, but we pulled a little tape that I want you to take a look at.
Okay.
The 19-year-old daughter wrote in 22 times about her mom, and she's really nervous to come talk to you and be really open and honest for the first time ever.
So I try to be very commonsensical and very straightforward. You know, one thing that has always frustrated me about psychology, it is often referred to as a soft science, which insults some psychologists, but it doesn't insult me because I look at that as a comparison to a laboratory science where you add things up and you get an equation and here's a number. You know, there's 0.003 parts of this in here.
Or you can put it in a petri dish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where in psychology, I can talk to you about your depression for 4 months. Are you more or less depressed? Well, what's the outcome criteria? Do you smile more, cry less? Are you have psychomotor retardation or hyperactivity? It's how do you measure? But I like to deal with things in a real clear, measurable way. And I think that comes from growing up poor. When you grow up poor, you're very outcome determinative because intentions don't put food on the table.
Yeah, I get that. I heard you say a bunch of things that I'd like to sort of underscore. And can I offer what I think the Dr. Phil brand is about? I think it's pretty accurate. And I also think you're in good company. I think it was Einstein who said, you know, if you can't explain something really complicated very simply to the masses, you don't know it well enough. Mm-hmm. So I think you do a good job of sort of taking complex either emotions or issues, subject matter, and like getting right down to brass tacks. You're a sort of a no-nonsense guy. Mm-hmm. You talked about, you know, logic. That resonates with me. I see that all the time. But I wonder if you get pushback on that from the professional community because it doesn't look like or sound academic. Do you get any pushback from that side of the fence?
Not from people that watch the show. People that just hear about the show or just kind of know about it in the ether, but they don't really look at it. If people watch the show, they come away saying three things. Number one, he does his homework. I get a notebook about 250 pages thick. We do a cross-sectional history, longitudinal history, medical history. We talk to collaterals. We get, if they've been hospitalized or anywhere along the line, we get all that information. If anybody's currently in therapy, we will not book them on the show unless and until we've spoken to the therapist, explained to them what we're going to do on the show, and gotten their written permission for their patient to be on our show. Not one time in 19 years have we ever violated that principle. And so when you take that kind of care, people go, well, you know, I don't have a problem with that. Yeah. So number one, people that watch say he does his homework. Number two, they say he gets it right. And number three, they say he only advances evidence-based therapies. I'm not an off-the-wall woo-woo guy. If I'm talking about OCD, there are certain evidence-based therapies that are empirically supported as efficacious for that disorder, and those are the only therapies that we talk about. Now, I may have a kind of from-the-hip delivery, maybe a folksy sort of colloquial-laced way of expressing it.
And you can crack the whip too. Sometimes, you know,
You're damn right. And I can also crack a joke. But at the end of the equation, what I'm recommending is empirically supported in the psychological and psychiatric literature. Yeah. And I don't diagnose people. And I say very clearly, I can't diagnose you here. I would have to complete a lot more interview than I have time to do. I would have to do a battery of psychometric tests. I'd probably have to do a brain workup and some lab work, and I can't do that here. Now, on the short list of my considerations, if I was doing it, might be the following. But these are things you're going to check out when you leave here. And so they look at that and say, you know what? I think this guy's checking all the boxes.
Yeah. Well, so it just seems from that explanation that what you're doing is more for everybody else than for the person sitting in that chair, maybe.
They're teaching tools.
Yeah.
Everybody there is a teaching tool. If I'm talking to you, it's a trade-off. You get up close and personal focus and lots of resources, because I have a blue ribbon advisory board with the top minds from the top learning centers in the country. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, University of Texas, USC. I've got top minds in psychiatry, psychology, sociology, medicine, nursing, theology, all the different fields that I can send a case to and say, guys, what do you think? Yeah. And he or she will give me, these are the peer review editors for the professional journals. And there's an 18-month lag on research getting published, so I get beyond cutting edge information.
Yeah,
and they give me their input that I then convey on the show.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're sort of, you're doing both, right? On the micro level, you've got someone in front of you who you're talking with, and on the macro level, you know, these topics that were sort of taboo before, or hidden, unknown, whether it's anxiety, depression, OCD, ADHD, whatever topic that you're covering, trauma. What you're doing is giving people permission to talk about it and feel it, and I think it's excellent.
And I've had schizophrenics on before that they might be really, if you just look at them, you know, a layperson might say, boy, there's a real nutball. And when someone like that is coming on, I'll typically have them on with their psychiatrist. Right. And before they ever walk out, I'll say to the audience, let me tell you something. This is not for entertainment purposes. This is for educational purposes. And you may hear some delusional thoughts that are outrageous. So I'm going to caution you, this is not funny. Don't react. I'm trying to give you some insight into how these people think. So if you have family members, if you have people in your circle that are like-minded, you know what this is and what kind of resources you need to seek out. And so I'm going to ask you to be very respectful of what we're talking about here. And you'll hear me say that on tape. I can give you 100 times I've said it on tape, and the audience respects that very much, and so they take it accordingly. So You know, do we do everything perfectly? Of course not. I'm sure I do things better after 19 years than I did after 2 or 3 or 4 years. But we do our best to treat everyone with dignity and respect and make sure that there's a lesson in every show that we do. Now, you know, some shows are fun. We do some shows that, you know, we got like social media stars or something. They're just being idiotic and we have fun with them. But when we're talking about mental illness, marriage, parenting, things like that, we really try to give them some solid advice that people around the country can use.
Yeah, no, I think it's spot on, and I like the fact that you have your brand value sort of at your fingertips, you know, because the thing about brand is, right, like we can have this idea in mind of what we want it to be, but brand is really what other people think of us, right? And there can be multiple touch points. So like if someone sees you on Joe Rogan's show, you know, the Dr. Phil brand is going to be put through that filter, and they're going to see you, you know, through what you did on that show, and to them that's the Dr. Phil brand. Versus, you know, if they know anything about your show on, you know, in other appearances or, you know, whatever their experience is, maybe the guy that you know, your own therapist. I want to ask you about that. Have you seen a therapist? Do you seek therapy? I'm always curious to ask professionals if they see other professionals. You know, I ask my doctor, do you see a doctor? Like, how does that work? Because I would think, you know, you're a human being. You gotta figure that out.
Well, I had some. I played football in college, and I had some head and neck injuries in college, and so my focus has been neurological a lot because I've had damage to my left eye and I can't see out of it very well, and so I've been very vigilant on my brain structure and function throughout my life. Now the NFL has caught up with that, you know, 30 years later, but I was aware of it at the time because of the symptoms that I had, you know, loss of equilibrium, vision impairment and stuff like that. So I've been real focused on it from that standpoint. And then when I went through my training, we were required to participate in therapy, you know, during our training programs, and so I did a lot of it then. But I've kept up all of the brain work since that time because the brain's a really resilient organ, and if you take good care of it, it'll take care of you. So even though I had some damage early on, I've been a good steward of it since then.
So can we talk about ambition for a second? Because I see you as like one of the hardest working guys in Hollywood, and you've been doing it for almost 20 years now.
My wife would agree with you.
So how's that going for you?
She says there's no prize for the hardest working person in the world, so why are you trying to win it? But, you know, I'm blessed in that I really like what I do. I mean, I really like the creative process. That doesn't mean that every day is fun. You know, even if you love what you do, you don't love it every day. And some days are better than others. But I've done something that if I can pat myself on the back about this, I've structured my world in a way that I get to intersect with my son's careers. And, you know, my son Jay, Stage 29 is actually his production company, and you know, he's an executive producer of Bull. He's the creator of The Doctors. He's executive producer of that animal rescue show and others that we do. And so he and I intersect a lot there. My son Jordan has an amazing musical career at this point that is just really going insane right now, and so I'm involved in that, and he writes music for our TV shows, and so we intersect in that way, and he's a digital whiz, and so he helps a lot on the digital side of our brands. So I've structured things where I get to intersect with my boys on a regular basis, and as a result I talk to them probably every day, and it's one of the smartest things I've ever done, to tell you the truth, because we have these common elements and we have a lot of fun doing it. And so I do work a lot, but I've involved my family in it. Robin's at the show every day. She has a really great podcast. The boys are involved in the industry. They have other things they do that don't involve me, but we have things where we do intersect. So even though I'm working real hard and doing a lot of stuff, it's got family all over it, so it doubles as family time and work time as well.
Yeah. So let me ask your advice, because the context of my question is, I know a lot of people who watch this show, you know, they're in the struggle, right? Like, so whether they've got their own business or they're entrepreneurs, freelancing, whatever, or maybe they're working for the man somewhere, dreaming about greener pastures, and maybe they have 2, 3, 4, 10 things that they want to do. You know, what's your advice about, you know, choosing the right ones, and then, you know, quantity? Because again, you know, you got so many things going on, but it sounds like strategically you found a way to connect other parts of your life and your family, and that's by design. But like, what advice would you give to others who are trying to choose between these several options?
Well, you know, I think you've got to really do your research ahead of time, because I think that it's all about quality, not quantity. I could have twice as many TV shows on the air right now as I do, but it's not about quantity. Jay always says, we're not about launching TV shows, we're about renewing TV shows. Getting a TV show on the air is not that hard. Keeping a TV show on the air is what it's about. We're in our 19th season. The Doctors are in their 12th season. Bull's in its 5th season. Daily Mail TV's in its 4th or 5th season. You know, we want shows that are sustainable. We don't want to just throw something up because it's a lot of work. And I think you've got to do things based on research to see if you do everything right, does it have a really good chance of succeeding? Or if you do everything right, does it still not have a good chance of succeeding? And I've always said, you've got to make sure that you're pursuing what you really want. It would be terrible if you became the best accountant in the world only to discover that you didn't want to be an accountant.
Steve Jobs said that. He said, you better love and have passion for what you do, because that's the only way you're going to be able to make this thing scale and have it be sustainable. Yeah. I'm totally on board with that. Let's go back to some of these signals. So you may think you have 3 great ideas, you know, that you love. How do you know that it's quality? What are some of the metrics or the signals that you look for? And let me give you an example of maybe a project you did. So I know that last time we talked, you had this app that was like Doctors on Demand, right? You could basically dial up a doctor, and at the time it was sort of a wild idea, revolutionary, but here we are now in 2020, we're with remote doctors. You're way ahead of your time, brilliant. But like, how did you have that foresight? How did you know?
Well, that's called having a smart kid. It was Jay's idea, and then we worked together to bring it alive. But and that's such a great example. And that project was a great success, as you know, because you're in the business of knowing these things, before coronavirus. Since coronavirus, it has become just hugely successful. I mean, insanely successful, for obvious reasons. People don't want to go sit in a room full of people that could be sick.
There's a good term for it. It's called doing business at the speed of need.
Exactly.
And you guys were there before the need, so it's like you're going to win.
And we kind of created the need and then met the need. But why I say that's such a good example to talk about is, I would absolutely not recommend somebody getting in the telemedicine business right now, because that window has passed. If we aren't the only people in it, but we are the dominant players in it. We were the disruptors, and we are the dominant players in it. And to get into that field right now, you've missed the window. So if somebody said, hey, that's a great, look at that, that's so great, and we've got a little quarter twist on that or something like that, I would say, no, you missed your window. That's like, let's come up with the internet. Well, you know what? Done.
Yeah, you had first mover advantage. It's like trying to come up with, Uber exists, Lyft, another rideshare. No, we don't need it. It's too late.
Yeah, and when somebody tries to get into an Uber type business, then the major players will make it very difficult for them to survive. I mean, they can cut rates, they can do things that just starve them out. So you really have to, that's what I mean about doing your homework. You've got to really study the marketplace and see what about your idea is truly novel. And a lot of people come up with these ideas and they don't do their research and find out that's really not a novel idea. You put a different paint job on it, but it's not really a novel idea. A lot of TV shows we get pitched are that way, where it's like, 8 years ago, they did 2 seasons of that, and that's kind of had its day. And so you've got to really do your homework and say, is what you're doing novel? And is there a real need for it? I have people come in all the time and say, we have a great idea for teenage girls 12 to 15. And I'm going, really? Can you narrow that down to blue-eyed blondes? What the hell's the matter with you? You don't want to be in the niche business. I want something that everybody can use. You don't want 12 to 15-year-old girls. You want 0 to 99-year-old men, and you want something that has broad application. So you get as big a bite at the apple as you possibly can. Now, I'm the same guy that said, I believe in a defined product. It doesn't mean that the product you have isn't defined. What it does, but you don't want to narrow your market to the point that you're shooting at such a small target demo that if you get a significant portion of that demo, you're still not there. I had somebody pitch us an idea the other day that the entire industry is $300 million a year. I'm sorry.
Was this a consumer product or a TV show?
It was a consumer product.
Okay.
Manufactured product. And the entire industry, if you came in and took over the entire industry, it's $300 million a year. That's not a mover.
Well, that's playing small in your books.
Well, it is small because the cost of getting into that business, I always say we go elephant hunting, we don't go rabbit hunting. And I'll tell you why. You still got to get up at 5 a.m. You still got to get on all your hunting gear. You still got to drive out there. You got to go through all the stuff. And what if you hit, you got a rabbit. So why not go elephant hunting? If you're going to go to all the trouble, then shoot for something that has a big payoff. Yeah. Don't shoot for something that, I'm not somebody that's going to open a bicycle shop. Because if you have the best bicycle shop in town, it's still a bicycle shop.
Right.
Unless that's just your passion and you just want to work on bicycles.
Right.
If it is, and that's what you want to do, that's great for you because there's more than one type of currency. There's monetary currency, there's emotional currency, there's social currency, there's spiritual currency. And if that's your currency, great. But that's not something that we would spend a lot of time in. That's not something you go to your investment bankers and you pitch them and they say, well, if you hit a home run, it's not enough money to justify the risk. The return on investment's not enough.
Yeah. If I was going to flip that scenario around and maybe pull a message or a lesson from it, I think what you're saying is really smart. What I heard you talk about was you got to understand your minimum viable audience, which is not necessarily what's the smallest amount of people that this product would appeal to necessarily. If you're thinking about hunting elephants or whales, a bigger unit than a little tiny one.
Yeah, and I'm not a hunter, by the way. I'd never shoot an elephant. I'm just saying something big.
Well, I wouldn't eat an elephant either, but apparently the way you do it is one little bite at a time. But, this is metaphor talk. But, it sounds like we should be focusing on the minimum viable audience, but making sure that in the context of who we're pitching it to, if we're pitching it to Dr. Phil versus, Uncle Bob or Aunt Susie, we've got to keep that in mind, right?
Yeah, and listen, It boils down to what's your distribution model. If you've got the cure for cancer in your shirt pocket and you don't have a good distribution model, if somebody asked me, would you rather have the key to Fort Knox or a good distribution system? I would rather have a good distribution system because it never runs out.
Yeah, I mean, maybe electric vehicles is a good example. That technology's been around for a long time, and it's not until Elon came along that finally get some traction on that.
Yeah, you've got to have the ability to get it out there, and we do some manufacturing products in our family of businesses, and if we can't put a product behind 6,000 or 8,000 retail doors day one, it's just a non-starter.
Yeah. So where's the white space right now? Looking at Dr. Phil as the investor, entrepreneur, where's the white space? What are we not seeing?
I think the model is changing right now because I don't think we're going to get back to what we've lived as normal. For example, you've seen the advent of virtual meetings, and people that thought you had to get on an airliner and fly LA to New York to have a face-to-face meeting for 2 hours and fly back. I think that's become obsolete.
Yeah, and the comparison I think about is 2001, the whole world changed, right, with 9/11. And then the whole world had changed again in 2008 with the Great Recession. Nothing was the same. We definitely turned a page, completely, did things differently. So I think this is another one of those sort of milestone, historic moments.
Yeah, I think it is. And the fact that we haven't had something that we've labeled as a pandemic before now is pretty miraculous. And the thinking that this is the last one we'll have is pretty naive. And I don't think this one's over. But I think that if you look at ways for people to do things they used to do by hand, in person, things that take the place of transportation in person, things like that, I think there are some real opportunities there. And even that window may be passed.
Can I ask you about content? Because now content delivery is such a thing, right? So there's been a lot of consolidation, right? Like with Disney Plus and Hulu and Netflix and Amazon. How do you think that's going to play out? Because I wish there was just one aggregator where I just have one monthly, just bill me once and then let me choose.
Well, it has changed. I know when we launched Dr. Phil 19 years ago, we have 220 affiliates. You had to call on dozens and dozens of groups to sell the show, because you sold it to different groups. You had your launch group, CBS, and then you had like Sinclair and people like that. But then this group had 8 stations. Here's a group that had 19 stations. Here's a group. Now you have about 7 or 8 phone calls to make, and if they don't want the show, then you don't have a show to launch. You can find this out in a day. And for example, we haven't put an entry in daytime for the last 3 years, even though there's a lot of real estate available. And people are calling us saying, have you got something for us in daytime? They're calling us saying, we want programming.
Yeah, we need inventory,
And we're saying no.
And why is that?
Because there's no money.
Oh, okay.
There's no money because they're looking at it as a commodity, just like we need something to put in here at 2 o'clock. And, they say somebody's taking all the money. There's not anything left in daytime. I won't say who they're saying that is, but if there's not, you get what you pay for. If you want to pay, $125,000 a week for a TV show, you're going to get what that looks like. If you want to pay $1 million a week, you're going to get what that looks like. And, you know, we can shoot these things on an iPhone, but it's going to look like you shot it on an iPhone. And so you get what you pay for. And we don't want to put something out there with our name on it that doesn't look quality.
Yeah, back to brand. We've come full circle. So does that mean then that, you know, it's like back to Wayne and Garth? You know, it's like a Wayne's world again? Like back to opportunities for the little guy?
That's pretty much what it is. You're starting to see, we went through a series of where some of the stations decided we can do our own. We don't need Stage 29, we can do our own. And they found out that was one of the most expensive decisions they ever made, because it was just a train wreck and it wasn't as easy or as inexpensive as they thought.
I got a tagline for you. Stage 29, we fix $6 haircuts. Right?
Exactly, exactly. So now they're coming back around and saying, no, we do want programming, but here's what we have to pay. And we say, no, you don't want it bad enough. And it'll cycle back around. It'll cycle back around. And so we shifted our focus to primetime, and so we've got 3 shows in primetime coming up now. So,
are you paying any attention to Spotify? What's happening? So, weigh in on the Joe Rogan deal, which is apparently $100+ million deal to go exclusive on Spotify. To me, and I've heard a lot of other people kind of speculate about this, Spotify could get in the TV or programming game real fast just by flipping a switch. Right?
Yeah, and full disclosure, Joe Rogan's a very good friend of mine. He's my son Jay's best friend, arguably. And so, full disclosure, when I say this, he is a hugely talented guy. Yeah. And he draws on 3 different audiences at one time, which aggregates a big audience for him. He's got the UFC audience. Yeah. He's an amazing comedian, yeah. Can fill up an arena. And he's big into hunting and fishing. So he's got 3 different audiences he draws from and aggregates into his show, and he does like 3 hours a day, and does a great job. And is a hell of a nice guy too, by the way. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of people say, where did this guy come from? But he's been doing it since
oh my God,
90s.
He's got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of broadcast out there. And
another guy who tells it like it is, logical, boils down, difficult.
Yeah, we get along really well.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, we get along really well.
Yeah, and now he's in Texas, right?
Yeah, he's moved to Austin. And he's got a home in Austin. My son Jay's got a home. They're about 5 minutes apart. They both have homes in Calabasas as well.
So are you looking at distribution like a platform, we'll just use Spotify as an example. Are you looking at that as a future platform for programming, or you want to keep it traditional? Well,
I think people are getting their information in different ways. And as I say, you meet people where they are. Digital is a real big part of my brand. A real big part of my brand, and we're really spending a lot of time on that right now.
Yeah. And what does that look like when you're spending time on it?
Well, it's YouTube and Facebook with videos and stuff. We have a lot of content, existing content, and then generating original content for digital, and then how you present that. What you put on TikTok and what you put on Instagram are not compatible content. You have to stop commenting daddy on all of my posts. I ain't your daddy. I hate to break it to you, but I ain't your daddy. And your real daddy's probably getting his feelings hurt. I appreciate the support. It's a little weird, but I do appreciate the support. And what you put on TikTok and Instagram is not compatible with what you put on FaceTime. Those are different audiences.
Yeah, I love that you know this.
Yeah.
Very savvy of you.
Yeah. And again, I have a smart kid, and it's a different kid than the other kid. That's what I'm saying. That's what I mean. I intersect these things. My younger son, Jordan, is very socially savvy, and it doesn't just mean that he likes to hang out on the social media platforms. He's into the algorithms. He's got in partnerships on my behalf with the social media platforms and makes deals with them and all sorts of things, and the demographics are different. The length of content is different with Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok.
No, we're on the socials as well. We're right there.
As you know, and that is a great place to do a number of things for me. Show the flag in terms of your brand, out of sight, out of mind. You keep your, Dr. Phil, the show itself is the engine that pulls the train. And everything you can do to support that on any platform is great. And then you also monetize those.
Yeah. Are you monetizing then on YouTube, for example?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And are you reinvesting those funds back into that platform, or are you using it are you distributing the wealth to other buckets?
Well, both. Right now, we're reinvesting a lot into YouTube because I hate the overuse of the word curate, but we are going in and reorganizing a lot of the content that we have on there, so we have better access to the metadata. And now there's parenting and marriage and depression and blah 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 blah. Yeah. Whereas before it was just based on views and things like that. We're making it more accessible.
Yeah, it does seem like you're curating it. You're creating these tentpole themes, or helping people find it better, because it's smart, because YouTube's a search engine, and if you're searching for anxiety, you can find it.
I got Jordan to take, my younger son, to take that over just a couple of months ago, and just in the things he's done so far, views are up like 178%, just by organization and curation of different things, making it accessible. So, and that means income's up 178%.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I think the opportunity too, I look at a platform like YouTube, and I think it would be a terrific place to test content, right? Instead of having to come up with a show pilot, you could shoot it on an iPhone if you wanted to. You probably don't have to at this point in your career, but you could use that as a testing ground, an incubator, and either to find other talent or to test theories that you have about content that could go or not go.
Well, you certainly can. You can do a 18-minute pilot of a concept on YouTube and get instantaneous feedback. And the metadata that's available there compared to something on linear is so much deeper and wider, and it tells you a whole lot about who liked what and who didn't, and how long they viewed, and et cetera, et cetera. There's just a lot of information that you can get that you can't get on linear broadcast.
Talk more. I know you mentioned last time we spoke about some of your missteps, some of your mistakes in business and branding, but like maybe impart some wisdom here as we round third and bring it home. And the people who watch the show, they're trying to figure it out, right? So they've either got their own venture going right now, and they watch this because they want to level up, they want to learn from people who've been there and done that.
I think that there's a place and time for everything you do, and I think that opportunity is, it's kind of where luck meets hard work. You can take a certain show and put it in the wrong time slot on the wrong network, and it failed dismally. You can put it in a different time slot on a different network, and it can be a huge success. The audience that watches Fox is decidedly different than the audience that watches CBS. And you would think that's why. I mean, it's just another channel on the television, but it is distinctively different because of what they typically broadcast.
Their brand.
Yeah, they definitely have a brand. And CBS, for example, they like to see a 40-something male lead, a dead body, and a puzzle to solve. Now, I'm telling you, you see some things that have come out on CBS that were all young cast, and they came out like gangbusters and did great for 3 weeks. Yeah. They didn't make mid-season.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, you look at a show like 60 Minutes. I'm a big fan of 60 Minutes, but the people who are on that show are, and I'm just guessing, they have to be at least over 50 years old. All of them are seasoned journalists, you know, maybe, you know, even higher on that scale, right?
You're being generous.
Being kind. But that's the demographic, right? Like people, you know, I remember my grandparents used to watch that show and, you know, have a piece of toast with some milk on the side and then go to sleep.
And, you know, if you go into, you know, prime time on Fox, for example, they like conflict, romance, and resolution, which is different than what I just described on CBS. You have to know your audience. And if you can't get it there, and somebody says, well, we'll take it over here, no, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You don't want a yes, you want a quality yes. And it's so easy it's sweet poison to take a yes in the wrong place at the wrong time. You don't want to get it launched, you want to get it renewed. And it's real hard sometimes to pass up what seems like a victory when you know it's not.
Does that sort of curb your ability to innovate though? Because you're playing to the crowd, or you're playing to that. You know, I think of a show like Simpsons, right? You know, like if we want to do another animated comedy or commentary on America, it's got to go to Fox, right? We can't do that on NBC or CBS. It just won't work. Does that sort of hinder your ability to innovate?
Well, it's just a matter of whether or not this buyer has an appetite for it. And you might take that show to CBS or NBC and they tell you no, and you go, well, our idea didn't work. No, your idea did work. You just took it to the wrong buyer. That's when, like you were saying, put it on a streaming service, build your audience there, then take it somewhere else. There's more than one way to skin a cat. And sometimes you've got to, you know, the quickest way to A to Z is not always in a straight line. You take something that is really good content, people are going to find it. Put it on the internet. You may think, well, that's second class. Anybody can put anything on the internet. That's true. But quality rises to the top. It finds its audience. And so if you believe in what you have, then stay with it and listen to what people say about it. It's when people dog on it, they're not just haters. There are people out there that, you know, they speak the truth. And, you know, I've got people that get on the message boards or something and dog on me. And I always listen to it to see if there's something I can take out of it. Sometimes it's just a laugh. You know, sometimes it's like, why don't you shut up, you bald-headed hillbilly? And okay, that's just a good laugh for me. But then there are sometimes, you know, people will say something and I think, okay, that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And so even you can write it off and say, oh, they're just a critic. Well, but there might be a kernel in there that you can pull out of there and use. So don't just write off people that disagree with you.
Yeah, it's good advice. I think, you know, finding your voice, finding your audience is super key. And I think fundamentally, if something's not going right in your life, you could check one or two things. One is, you know, are you playing to the right audience? Maybe your music is beautiful, but it's the wrong audience. Yeah. So you got to find the person who can appreciate your music. Or maybe your stuff's not as good as you think it is.
Right.
And basically, if you can check those two things and find the right fit, then you're off.
And why isn't it as good as you think it is? It may be one molecule off. It may be substantively at its core good, but there's just one molecule off.
Yeah.
And, you know, they make Prozac in a bathtub. You could make Prozac in a bathtub, and it's a multi-billion-dollar drug. And if you look at its formula, and I won't say what it's one molecule off of, but it isn't a great innovation, but they stayed with it and it became something that's been actually very helpful. Yeah, and you say, how do people decide which one is the right idea? Yeah, it begins with your passion. Are you really passionate about it? Yeah. And do you really have something novel? Don't blow smoke up your own ass. You gotta really, really ask yourself, am I bringing something novel to the table? And if so, what is it? And like you said, if you can't articulate it, it's the old Hollywood adage of the elevator pitch. If you can't articulate it between the first floor and the 10th floor, you don't have it yet.
I mean, we were just sitting back, you know, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that. You you know, tracking my roots, where I came from and where I'm going. But like I say, man, always said it. It's not about the destination. It's all about the journey.